So thank you for giving me a round of applause, but a chance to talk to you about it. It is Cisco with a C, not with an S. I'm not the food company. So I want to talk, and yes, there is a baseball reference in this, so apologies to non-baseball fans, but as a lifelong Baltimore Orioles fan, well, I usually end my cheering in April. This year I got to cheer through September and didn't get to celebrate in October. But I do want to talk a little bit about baseball because when you are a 6'2", injury-prone, low, lean muscle mass teenager, you go to baseball. You don't play football, you get broken in half. So that's kind of my background on this. What I want to talk about, though, is we've talked a lot about and heard a lot about, and in different sessions, the idea of what do we mean by hybrid? What do we mean by RTO? What do we mean by mandates? How do we balance these things? We in Cisco decided to treat it with purpose. And I know that's kind of the buzzword of the month, the quarter, the year, but we do have a way we define purpose inside of the company. I'm actually part of the wider HR organization, but when I say that, our HR organization is actually made up of 6 Ps. See if I can remember these now. It is purpose, planet, places, politics, people, and policies. I got them all 6. Wrong order, but all 6. So 6 different functions, all with P after them. The reason we do this is that we become kind of the backbone of the company around why we do these things, but it has nothing to do with our technology products, and it has almost nothing to do with traditional HR practices. We have some of that. What I would say inside of our company, and I'll get to this in a minute, but we believe that the old proxies of productivity are no longer relevant. And I've heard that as kind of a theme or a hypothesis put forward by multiple folks. But the idea of how we improve productivity has nothing to do with attendance. And our COO actually stood up during one of the presentations I gave to the board a while back and basically said, it is time for this company to stop pretending that attendance is a proxy for productivity. That was kind of the door finally breaking open to decide what we're going to do as a company. So we decided not to solve today's problems with solutions from 20 years ago and looked at it very differently. So what we like to say is that our real estate strategy has almost nothing to do with real estate. It is not about just the place. It is not just an open field and hope if you give people a great setting that they'll show up and start working productively. And so the field of dreams reference in this was, if you build it, they will come. Not so much anymore. And we know this, you have to earn the commute. People want to be a part of the community. We know that people want to make sure that this is a worthwhile use of their time. And when they do show up, the people they're going to show up to see are relevant to what they need to do that hour, that day, that week, etc. Chance encounters is a wonderful notion and serendipitous approach towards the chemistry and discovery. The reality is that years and decades of testing on that has shown that it gives people a great sense of experience, but it's really hard to define if you're getting any better business outcomes of that. So we don't believe it's about giving them a great field to play on. So no offense to 1989 Kevin Costner, but it's not if you build it, they will come. I'll use a better baseball reference, which is 1993, The Sandlot. Junkie field, amazing team. That movie is about Ham and Squints and Benny and Smalls. That's what made the team great, and didn't matter how rich the kids were that show up on the bicycles. These are the kids to be competed with. And these were the kids that knew it was about the game, it was about the fun, it was about the team. And it centers on the people. Yes, they play baseball. Yes, they play baseball on an old Sandlot. And yeah, it's a little bit, it's not a tearjerker, but it's a good feel-good kind of a moment. But the idea is to center on the people. It's not about tearing down a cornfield and putting up a field. It's actually about embracing where the kids are already playing and understanding what the users and the people are doing. I believe, and my company believes, yeah, we have the occasional internal struggle over this and a little internal strife like any of us, but what I believe and what the company believes is that there are only 2 things that matter in this equation, and that's humans and leaders. Doesn't mean that leaders aren't humans, it just means that there's individual want, desire, and free will, and there's what leaders have to actually generate in terms of business outcomes, and that's where the balance comes in. The reason this is so important is there's 2 kinds of change going on. And for anyone that's likes to follow futurists and listen to various people out there, Dan Burris has a simple way of viewing this, and his view is that you can predict the future, and that stop talking about cyclical change and start to talk about linear change. Linear change are those things that once people get a hold of it, they are not going to give it up. When air conditioning gets made available in southern Florida, they don't surrender it 2 years later and go, yeah, enough of that. Once you have access to certain things, once you have access to information, once you have access to education, once you have access to nutrition, you don't give it up. You don't say, well, I've had enough of that good nutrition stuff. I'm ready to go back to subsistence farming. Thank you, can't get it out today. This is the thing that we need to embrace. And if you look at what happened pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, 31% of our people in Cisco define themselves as office-based, 4 to 5 days a week. 14% said, yeah, home-based, as in 0 or 1 day a week that I'll come into the office. What we found, however, is look how this changed when we got post-pandemic, which is 2% of our people said they're now 4 to 5 days a week. And 32% said, yeah, I'll come in 0, 1 to 2 days a week. That skew is material. So the population has spoken. It doesn't mean you have to listen. It just means the population has spoken inside of that. If you look at the cyclical part of the change, we all go through cycles where I need to be alone. I need to have a quiet room. I need to turn the media off for a little while. I don't need any more music. I need to stare at a blank wall for a little while. I need to drink a glass of wine and listen to a guy from Cisco yammer on for a while, whatever it may be. Our preferences were really clear inside of this when we did our return to the office survey, and that's that only 2 people said the office was the most important solution for the company. 32% favored home, 66% hybrid is the answer. Hybrid in our company translated to flexibility and choice. The issue is that what people did miss the most. Our Leesman survey was really clear that 59% of the people said the number one thing I missed was seeing my peers. Video was not a good proxy for connecting with people that I really hold dear in my team, and we know that. It's part of that human ritual of the handshake, the meal, the coffee, the tea, and what I call that 1 + 1 = 3 math. We know that, but you have to be intentional around how you do that, and the answer we don't believe is a central mandate. You now have to balance those individual, the people have spoken, to what the leaders need, because the leaders have to drive business outcomes. Quoting a former partner of BCG, Yves Moreau, used to say, leaders have one job, and that is to assure that things that would not spontaneously happen, happen. That's what leaders' job is, which means driving business outcomes. A very non-biological pursuit of forcing people in a room to solve a problem for someone else's benefit. That is what leaders have to do. We started with one central mandate, and that's that there'd be no central mandate. It was a joke in the company that the decision was made that the only policy we're going to have about hybrid work is that there will be no central policy about hybrid work. And this was the really difficult part. I can't remember who I heard it say today, but that doesn't mean leaders stand in front of their team and say, don't you think we should all be in the office 3 days a week? Don't you? Don't you? Don't you? That's not what we're talking about. What are the business outcomes you need? It is our hardware development leader who said, I'm in San Jose during hard lockdowns of pandemic because every time we launch a development campaign, the challenge we have is if we launch it virtually, it takes 3 weeks to get all the questions and clarifications on the table and solved. If I can get everybody in a room, it's 3 days. That is a business leader that understands what works for his team. Third part is, we've heard this how many times from different folks? This is, I think we can all agree and coalesce around this idea that leaders have to activate spaces. Leaders does not mean, however, the top of the hierarchical food chain. That means thought leaders, project leaders, discipline leaders, team leaders, community leaders. Our heads of our EROs and our inclusive communities serve as leaders. They have to figure out what works for them, what they're celebrating, how they're bringing the teams together. And perhaps most importantly, taken from my boss, who's the head of 3P, we jokingly say 6P, but Fran, who basically says, we know that this is going to be harder on our leaders. And that is the difficult point. That is the pinch point inside of the company right now, is it is not going to be easy because it's not going to be simple. There's not a central mandate, and there isn't the answer is 3 days a week. What was the question? We are trying to be really careful about this and force leaders to decide what business outcomes they need, what they need from their teams, and recognize the diversity and differentiation in the teams. So these are taken from 3 different surveys. So this sounds weird statistically to use 3 different reference points, but it does a good job of perhaps doing some confirmation bias, but we believe in each of these. So if you look at the Gartner survey, 52% actually say that flexible policy helps people make the decision to stay with their company. WorkHuman basically says 30% of employees looking for a new job are saying flexibility is what drove them away. And 64% would consider looking for another job from what ADP's Workforce View said. These are fairly stark statistics when you think about it, because at the end of the day, it's always a competition for talent. Yes, it's market share, and yes, it's customers, and yes, it's margin, but it's talent. What we decided to do was blend these 2 things together. So if I'm going to torture the baseball reference, if you think about how a baseball is taken together, it's basically 2 flat pieces of leather that are stitched together. When they're not stitched together in balance, they're just 2 flappy pieces of leather that you can't do anything with. Stitch them together correctly, stuff them, and you get this great 3-dimensional object that has function. That is the voice of the people and the voice of the leaders. You can bring those 2 things together in some kind of yin-yang, use your cliche as you see fit here. That actually gives you a 3-dimensional solution that should work, but you have to be authentic to who you are. We decided in Cisco that who we were places that were going to be defined around 4 uses. The enterprise center that you see on the far right is basically a combination of other things. Call them headquarters. A customer showcase. Why do we have that real estate? We want to be really intentional and really purpose-driven around. We are there to have access to our customers, access to the marketplace. It is a place we should be showcasing the best of our technology, the best of our partnerships, the best of our channel partners. That's why we have those. And we design those very differently with very different business outcomes. We don't design them for attendance. We design them for customer visits, potential value of the visit, how much they'd be willing to buy, the conversion rate, and this is where it gets a little dicey. I was just talking to Christian in the audience about this. This is where the leaders are getting a little reluctant to want to be held to account on this. If you want $40 million of capital to renovate your space, are you willing to stand up to a business outcome that says, if I spend $40 million or invest $40 million in this, and the run rate implications of this on the P&L, am I going to be able to actually prove that I'm selling more product or I'm converting more sales? Second part, talent centers. What do we see on attrition of talent? Can we hire the best people? Can we win in the markets we want to win in? This has allowed us to embrace recruiting from all over because we stopped being just a site-based campus. We have different locations where we've consolidated our presence, and we are focusing on, are those sites showing statistical differentiation in the talent centers? Operations center, this is where we service our customers. You can call them service centers, you can call them call centers, but this is where we do network operations monitoring, this is where we do security monitoring, and we want to know that we are solving problems faster in those locations because of the way we design them. Product centers are R&D and research centers. Are we hitting the development milestones? Each of those have different use profiles, each of them have different locations, and we're trying to force leaders to think through why you have these centers and why you've made the decisions to make these investments. The way we've done it post-pandemic is, first off, we set up a 100-site, really 122-site formal restructure and impairment account to be able to take all the portfolio out that was being used less than 20% of the time, because it's clear that that wasn't a natural historic way we used the site, and there were no former business outcomes or sites we had redundant locations. We had 7 locations in Center City, London. I'm sure the answer isn't 0, but the answer isn't 7, so we went to 2. We have city after city where we got rid of the redundancy in this. This is what we call as our divest to invest. So this is the divestment side. We took about $100 million out in run rate savings so that we could then do the investment side of things. A couple examples. Chicago, we opened sadly during pandemic, had great plans pre-pandemic, but unfortunately opened during pandemic and has sort of seen itself get a little bit tired even during the days of pandemic and open to a little bit of fanfare. New York's been a big deal for us to open in 110 above Madison Square Garden. Johannesburg was our first investment in Africa that was a new site discussion. We did that last year as well. Atlanta, I love this. This is our CFO actually sitting by the window in the cafe doing his highly confidential work because his comment was, I am not sitting in that damn executive center. I want to be where the team is. So good case in point of how this works. And then Paris, which is opening in our partnership with the Olympics in Center City, Paris, one block of the Champs-Élysées. Sounds really expensive. The reason we were able to do it is we took 2/3 of our footprint out of Greater Paris market to go to one really concentrated solution to get access to our customers. The challenge is, and this is the thing we haven't yet figured out, for every one of these locations, and the top level view around what do we mean by hybrid is balancing. These are the 3 defined tension points inside of the company. How do we deal with well-being and productivity? How do we ask people to turn on and turn off and take care of themselves at the same time? This is not a sprint, it is a marathon, but at times you have to sprint. So as our CEO says, sometimes there's going to be good work, sometimes there's going to be tough work, sometimes there's going to be more work. Got to think that through. Flexibility and accountability. We want to give people flexibility to make the choices they need. You need to make sure that not just the technology, but the leadership experience they had holds them to account to deliver those business outcomes. But if the leader hasn't thought through what works for their team, and the leader hasn't thought through what business outcomes they're trying to drive, you can't expect to drive accountability. Accountability isn't showing up in the office. That's just filling out the form and ticking the box. And then the third is location and connection. During pandemic, we were able to hire thousands of people in markets we never hired from before because we could work from anywhere. We can't very well now say, great, we're glad we hired you in southern Idaho. We now need you to relocate to San Jose because we've decided to bring people back to the office. We have an ethical obligation to fulfill our promise to those people we recruited so that we could win in markets that were non-traditional technology and talent markets. Each of these are tension points that we know are there and that we know have complexity. So what I'd close on is you can't make this just about real estate. You have to make this about the interconnection of the tech has to work, yes. And in a company like ours, you'd expect the technology works. You cannot do it without having some semblance of space. But when you say space, where is that space? What are you trying to do and what are the outcomes? And the third are the people. What are the people trying to do? Listening to the people on their choices, listening to the leaders that have to drive business outcomes so that you can get this great intersection of people, places, and technology. Otherwise, you end up as a great picture in an architectural magazine, look how beautiful it is unused, versus a town hall meeting that we have completely impromptu with myself, the CFO, the head of community engagement in the Atlanta office, that was literally standing room only with 5 minutes notice to say, yeah, we'll do a Q&A about what's going on in the Atlanta market. This is the difference between really good architecture and really good design. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.